Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into some really big questions about power, society. We're looking at a source you asked us to explore, Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism.
Okay.
Now, this is definitely not light reading, but wow, does it offer some powerful insights into how certain political movements get started and, well, what makes them so incredibly dangerous?
It really is a landmark work. Arts dives so deep historically, philosophically, trying to get grips with totalitarianism as something, well, new,
Hmm.
unprecedented.
Yeah.
It takes you through some pretty dark history, no doubt about it. But it feels essential, really, for understanding the 20th century and maybe, what comes after.
Absolutely. And it is a huge book. Dense. So what we want to do today is kind of pull out some of the core ideas, those moments where you go, okay, I see. Give you the essence of her argument without, getting lost in absolutely everything. Okay, so where does she start? Where does Arendt begin tracing these paths toward totalitarianism? What are these sort of initial conditions?
Well, she starts, perhaps surprisingly for some, with antisemitism. Now, she's careful to point out anti-Jewish prejudice. That had a long, grim history in Europe, especially in the 19th century. But as a political ideology, something to really drive a mass movement. She argues it was mostly on the fringes then, kind of outside the mainstream political currents.
Okay, so you had prejudice, you had bias in society, sure, but it wasn't yet this huge political engine it became later on.
Exactly. That's the distinction she makes. Then fast forward to the 20th century, and suddenly anti-Semitism is right at the center. It becomes the ideological core for the Nazis.
It wasn't just part of the ideology, it was the ideology in a way.
Pretty much. The whole structure of the Third Reich, I mean, you had to prove you weren't Jewish.
Yeah.
It drove policy, it fueled a world war, and ultimately genocide. Mass murder on an industrial scale right there in, civilized Europe.
It's still staggering to think about that shift, how it went from, like you said, fringe ideas to state policy and mass murder. And Arndt's goal isn't just to condemn it, right? She's trying to understand the how, the mechanics of it.
That's exactly it. Of course, the moral horror is there. It's undeniable. But her project is intellectual. She's dissecting it. What historical shifts, what political ideas created the space for these extreme ideologies to not just appear, but to actually take power and be put into practice so brutally.
And moving on from that, she also talks quite a bit about the nation state, doesn't she? About its decline being significant. What was weakening there, according to her?
Yeah, she saw this growing instability in the balance between society and the state, particularly in 19th century Europe. And this really impacted Jewish integration, or the lack of it. She describes this kind of impossible situation, where Jewish people might gain social status, maybe in finance or the arts, but still face political blocks. Or the other way around, they might get political rights on paper, but never really get social acceptance.
So always kind of stuck in the middle, never fully belonging.
Exactly, a perpetual insecurity. And at the same time, imperialism was changing. The old model, driven mainly by Western Europe, Britain especially, was sort of morphing. America starts rising, but more through economic leverage, military aid, rather than direct colonies. And in Central and Eastern Europe, you still have Russia pushing outwards, expanding its continental reach.
And the language changed too, right? The justifications. You mentioned the white man's burden fading out.
Right, that starts to sound dated, maybe a bit embarrassing. So it gets replaced with talk of commitments, responsibilities, even ironically solidarity with revolutionary movements elsewhere.
It sounds more abstract, less about direct gain, maybe.
Precisely. And Arendt links this shift, this move towards abstract justifications and away from clear national interest to the weakening of the nation state itself. It becomes more vulnerable, she thinks, to these big sweeping ideologies that aren't just about the nation anymore.
Which sets the stage for totalitarian thinking.
Yes. And even the word expansion changes. It becomes extension, or even overextension. She points out how foreign aid, even if it looks humanitarian, is always political. It's about influence, not just profit, in this new era.
Okay, so we have these background conditions. Now let's talk about totalitarianism itself. It's a word we use a lot, maybe sometimes loosely. Arendt is really specific that it's not the same as other kinds of nasty regimes, right?
Absolutely fundamental for her. Totalitarian government is not, she insists, just a harsher dictatorship or a more brutal tyranny. It's different in kind, different goals, different structures, different methods.
Even between Nazi Germany and Stalin's Russia, the two big examples she points out differences, doesn't she? While still calling them both totalitarian. What's the point there?
Yeah, she does. She might talk about, say, the role of sheer incompetence being maybe more visible in the Soviet system sometimes, or differences in how the camps were run, the types of cruelty, levels of corruption. things like that. But her point is that those variations often stem from the specific country, its history, its culture. The underlying form of government, the totalitarian form, is the crucial thing. She's an analogy. You think about absolute monarchy. It looked different in France than in Spain or Prussia, but it was still absolute monarchy. The core principles were the same.
Ah, okay. So the national flavor might differ, but the fundamental structure of totalitarianism is the common element.
Exactly. That's what she's trying to isolate and define.
So what are those defining features then? What makes these movements uniquely totalitarian for Arendt?
Well, one key thing is their ambition. They aim to be international, ultimately global. Their ideology isn't just for one country. It claims to explain everything for everyone, everywhere. It's inherently expansionist in its thinking. She even mentions, looking at later examples like the Chinese Communist Party, this tendency towards a universalist, borderless ideology.
That's a chilling thought, not just controlling one nation, but aiming for the whole world based on this total system.
Yeah.
She also brings up how fighting against communism, the sort of blanket anti-communism, could actually cloud the issue.
Yeah, she worried about that. That lumping all communist states together under one label could stop us from seeing the crucial differences. Some might be dictatorships, repressive one-party states, sure. But are they truly totalitarian in her specific sense? She felt that broad-brush anti-communism could obscure that vital distinction. We need precision.
That makes sense. Now, an interesting point she makes is about who gets attracted to these movements before they take power. It's not always just the mob. The elite can get drawn in too. Why?
It's a fascinating and disturbing observation. She suggests that in times when traditional values and social structures are decaying, some parts of the elite can actually be drawn to the movement's rejection of respectability. There's a kind of perverse thrill in smashing norms.
Like a fascination with the sheer destructive force of it.
Sort of. A delight in seeing the old bourgeois world torn down. And they might be attracted to the, frankly, vulgar and often absurd ideas because the old sensible ideas seem bankrupt. It's almost nihilistic. They mistake the mob's raw power for some kind of authenticity or future strength.
They're so tired of the old lies, they fall for the new, bigger ones.
Perhaps. And Arendt also talks about the role of front organizations here. These groups give members a sense of belonging, a place, but they also cleverly isolate them from the real world, from different viewpoints. They create a kind of bubble.
A safe space for indoctrination, essentially. Looks normal on the outside, but pulls you deeper in. Okay, so the movement gains traction, maybe takes power. How does it rule? Let's talk about the leader principle. What's that about?
Arendt uses this striking image, she says. The totalitarian state is intentionally shapeless. It doesn't have a clear, predictable structure like a normal bureaucracy. There are offices, departments, party cells. But the lines of authority are deliberately blurred, overlapping, often competing.
Why? What's the point of that chaos?
Because that very shapelessness, that constant flux and competition, makes it the perfect tool for the leader. The leader stands above it all, the only fixed point. He can play factions off against each other, bypass official channels. It prevents any real power block from forming against him. There's no stable structure to oppose.
So engineered chaos to ensure total control at the very top.
Precisely. You end up with this weird situation where you have the official state government, the ostensible power, and then the real power held by the party, or even specific parts of the party loyal to the leader. It breeds confusion, arbitrariness, lawlessness, really.
It sounds incredibly inefficient.
It is inefficient in normal terms. But efficiency isn't the main goal. Control is. The movement's ultimate aim, she argues, isn't just to duplicate offices, but to destroy all independent structures. This multiplication of roles actually diffuses responsibility. Nobody's truly accountable because lines are blurred, and competence becomes less important than loyalty. The movement, the ideology, the leader's will that's supreme, above the state, above the nation, even above the formal rules of the movement itself sometimes.
Loyalty trumps everything. Which brings us neatly to ideology and propaganda. How do they function in the system? It's not just about winning elections anymore.
No, it's much deeper. Arendt says totalitarian movements create this lying world of consistency. They build a completely fabricated reality through their ideology. And this fake world, because it seems internally consistent and offers explanations for everything, can be incredibly appealing to people who feel lost, disconnected, uprooted, as she puts it.
So the propaganda isn't just telling lies, it's building an entire alternative reality.
Exactly. And its real power is insulating people from the actual world. It cuts them off from contradictory facts, from different perspectives. It plays on fears, rumors, existing prejudices, and seals people inside this ideological echo chamber.
She uses that chilling example of the Nazis and the protocols of the Elders of Zion, doesn't she? Not just using it to whip up hate.
Right. It wasn't just fear of the Jewish conspiracy. She argues the Nazis studied it almost like a how-to guide. Look how they supposedly plan to take over the world. That's how we can do it. It became a model for their own methods of infiltration and control. Twisted, but revealing about their focus on technique.
Wow, yeah.
And underpinning it all is that core idea, right, is what is good for the movement, which might be completely different from what's good for the country or the people or even common sense. The true believer, the ideologist, becomes obsessed with the logic of the system itself more than the original idea. The process devours the content. So the supposed goal, like liberating the workers or purifying the race, gets lost in the sheer mechanics of implementing the ideology.
The how completely takes over the why. It's a terrifying picture of ideology run wild. And of course, the main tool for implementing this is terror. What's Arendt's take on the role of terror? It's more than just scaring opponents, isn't it?
Oh, far more. For Arendt, total terror is the absolute essence of totalitarian government once it's in power. Its purpose isn't just punishment or suppression. It's meant to be an instrument to accelerate the laws of history or nature that the ideology proclaims.
Accelerate the laws, what does that mean?
It means forcing reality to conform to the ideology. If the ideology says certain classes or races are doomed by history, terror is used to eliminate them faster than nature or history might otherwise do. It's about actively making the ideology true by brute force.
So it's reshaping humanity itself according to the blueprint.
Exactly. And its ultimate target, she argues, is human freedom itself. The capacity for newness, for spontaneity, the very fact that each person born is a new beginning. Totalitarian terror aims to crush that. You see this in things like stripping people of citizenship, of their legal rights, what she calls killing the juridical person in man, putting camps outside the normal legal system. And the targets expand, don't they? First, it's active opponents. Then it's objective enemies, people who haven't done anything but just belong to the wrong group, according to the ideology. And finally, it can become completely arbitrary. Random people declared undesirable, unfit to live.
Superfluous.
That's her chilling term. Radical evil emerges, she says, when human beings have become entirely superfluous, interchangeable, disposable.
And this ties into the idea of lawlessness, doesn't it? It seems like a contradiction. They're obsessed with their own laws of history or nature, but operate outside actual human laws.
Precisely. Totalitarian regimes despise positive law, the actual laws on the books made by humans. They claim obedience to a higher law. Nature, history, race, the proletariat, as interpreted by the leader, of course. And the ideology provides this total explanation. It claims to know the past, present, and future. It focuses relentlessly on what things are becoming according to the ideology, not what they actually are. Ideological thinking, she says, becomes sealed off from experience. If reality contradicts the ideology, then reality must be wrong. It insists on its own truer reality.
A complete rejection of facts, of evidence, if it doesn't fit the predetermined narrative. It's mind-boggling. Finally, Arendt talks about something that feels maybe more personal, but she argues is fundamental: isolation and loneliness. How do they fit into this picture?
This is crucial for her. She says totalitarianism doesn't just attack the public sphere, politics, free speech. It also invades and destroys private life, the space of personal relationships, family, friendship. And its real bedrock, she argues, is loneliness. Not just being alone, like solitude, but that deep, terrifying feeling of not belonging to the world at all, of having no place, no connection.
And the regime fosters this.
It weaponizes it. By breaking down social bonds, creating suspicion, atomizing society, it produces this organized loneliness. And this state of isolation makes people incredibly vulnerable. They lose common sense. They lose the ability to judge reality because they've lost connection with others who share and test that reality. This organized loneliness, she says, is far more dangerous politically than just people feeling powerless under a normal tyranny. It makes them ripe for the totalizing ideology that promises belonging, even if it's a destructive, false belonging.
Wow. It's a devastating analysis, systematically destroying everything that makes us human and connected. So as we try to wrap up this deep dive into Arendt's Origins of Totalitarianism, quite a journey. What are the absolute key takeaways you think our listeners should hold on to?
I think first, just the sheer uniqueness Arendt sees in totalitarianism. It's not just dictatorship plus. It springs from specific historical roots like radicalized antisemitism, the shifts in imperialism, the crisis of the nation state. Second, its core features. That global ambition, the shapeless structure centered on the leader, the creation of a fake reality through ideology and propaganda, and the essential role of terror not just to oppress, but to remake reality. And finally, maybe most profoundly, how it feeds on and cultivates isolation and loneliness, destroying both public and private life to make individuals completely subservient to the movement. It's about eliminating human freedom and spontaneity at its very root.
It really is an incredibly powerful lens. Unsettling, definitely, but powerful for understanding history and maybe for keeping an eye on the present, too. It makes you think about how fragile things can be, our institutions, our connections.
Indeed. Which brings us back to that really stark idea of Arendt's, that totalitarianism shows us a situation where everything is possible. Anything can be done. Anything can be justified within its logic. So what does that mean for us today, thinking about power, freedom, what it means to be human, especially now with, technology, potential for mass manipulation? It's a heavy question, but one she forces us to confront. What happens when everything is possible?
A deeply sobering thought to leave everyone with. Look, if this conversation has got you thinking, and I really hope it has, we absolutely recommend diving into Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism yourself. It's tough, yes, but incredibly rewarding. Essential reading, really. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.